The Moss Report is brought to you by Mycolife, makers of the world's best mushroom extracts, available exclusively at mycolife.us. Hello, healers. My name is Ben, and this is the Moss Report. We're here today with my father, author and founder of the Moss Report, Dr. Ralph W. Moss. Good morning, Dad.
Good morning, Ben.
So today we're going off of our usual nutrition and foods and cancer-fighting natural remedies to a subject that is sort of by popular demand. We've had a number of inquiries, both in the comments on our YouTube channel as well as emails, people sharing their questions and information that they've gathered. And so today we're going to be hopefully getting to the bottom of the subject of ivermectin and cancer. I'm eager to hear what it is that you found.
Well, great. Thank you, Ben. And I'll try to do this in a dispassionate way because most of the conversations around ivermectin have been very politically fraught. And people took sides, and I think sometimes they took sides based more upon their political orientation or their party affiliation in the United States and elsewhere than over the science. And then when scientists chimed in on this, they were accused of being partisan and basically coming up with negative results regarding the effect of ivermectin on COVID-19. So 95% of the attention given to ivermectin has been about its purported effects on COVID, and very little really on cancer. So when you say that I've dug deep into this, I dug as deep as I could get, but I don't feel fully satisfied with what I found.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could run down a few things. I've made a few slides that I could share with people that kind of hit the high points of what I have found vis-a-vis ivermectin and cancer. And again, I'll say I don't have a political dog in the fight. I was not an advocate for ivermectin in treating COVID, but that's mainly because I don't deal with infectious diseases that much. As you know, I've spent 50 years examining complementary and conventional, other alternative types of treatments for cancer. That's been nearly an exclusive, almost obsessive concern of mine. So it's a little bit out of my wheelhouse to deal with with a different set of diseases.
Okay, but we do, in the mossreport.com, have a whole section on repurposed drugs, which this would fall into that category, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely, and it would be a prime example of a purported or proposed repurposing or repositioning of a drug. So I think the first thing that really surprised me, Ben, in investigating this, coming from paying so much attention to the truly non-conventional, so what used to be called alternative medicine side of things, was that the discoverers of ivermectin and the parent compound avermectin that they come from won the Nobel Prize for this discovery.
Really?
Yes, in 2015.
For what? I don't even know what they would have won it for.
For different kinds of parasites, to counteract parasites like river blindness and elephantiasis, what used to be called elephantiasis, different flukes that infect people mainly in tropical countries.
Okay.
And these are considered diseases for which there hasn't been very much attention paid.
So it was originally developed as a drug for people.
Originally, I think it was the first approved use was for veterinary use.
Okay.
But then it also was for people, and it is available in the United States over the counter as a cream for head lice.
Interesting.
Yeah, it has these anti-parasite properties to it. Nobody disputes that.
Okay.
There's no controversy over that. And as I say, Campbell, Professor Campbell, who worked for Merck for almost his entire career, and a Japanese doctor, shared the Nobel Prize with somebody that we knew much more about, which was Tu Youyou, who was the first Chinese woman to win a Nobel Prize, and she won it for a treatment for malaria called artemisinin.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
this has also come into the cancer world in various ways that we could talk about in the future. But
Right.
the UN, excuse me, the Nobel Prize Committee kind of went outside their usual emphasis on Western medicine, and in 2015 gave the award to 3 people from 3 different countries who made advances in treating these lesser known or less treated tropical diseases, or diseases of the less developed world, let's say, which have
Okay.
supposedly, and I have no reason to doubt this, have saved millions of people's lives and millions of people from dying of horrible diseases like river fever and elephantiasis and malaria. Huge contribution to humanity, and well deserving of the Nobel Prize, just a little bit out of the norm of what they give Nobel Prizes for.
And these are all anti-parasitic.
Correct.
Because those diseases stem from parasites.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
but cancer is not a parasite, as far as I know.
No, it's not. It's not. I'm trying to even think of what would be an exception to the rule, and I can't even come up. Maybe there are some forms of liver cancer that are more likely to occur in people whose livers have been heavily infected by parasites. I'm smiling inside because there once was an alternative practitioner named Hulda Clark, who wrote The Cure for All Cancers, and she believed that all cancers were caused by a liver fluke called Fasciolopsis buski.
And fluke is a type of parasite?
Yeah. Don't ask me to spell it. I know how to pronounce it, but I can't. I
missed it again. What is it?
I memorized the sound of it, and I never really paid much attention to the spelling.
Okay, but it's a type of liver parasite.
I'll say it again just because I love the sound of it. Fasciolopsis buski. Fasciolopsis buski. And this was, she wrote books, a book called The Cure for All Cancers, The Cure for All Diseases, The Cure for Death, I think was one. But anyway, she didn't get too far. She got as far as Tijuana, Mexico, and, the authorities finally shut her down. She was not a medical doctor, and she was treating patients, and I think eventually they put the kibosh on her.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody once wrote, not a fan of mine, but they said that Moss never recognized the existence of quackery until he met Hulda Clark. So I never met Hulda Clark, but I did write about her in my book Herbs Against Cancer, and it wasn't very favorably because there was just no science there, and it was all kind of probably just her personal obsession with this. But here we are 50 years or so later, and ironically, an anti-parasite disease treatment turns out to have some purported anti-cancer effect. So you can see I'm sort of smiling inside because the people arguing on both sides of this probably don't know about Fasciolopsis buski and Hulda Clark. But this was my first encounter supposedly with like a real quack treatment. Okay. Mm-hmm. But we can leave aside the idea that cancer is caused by flukes and by parasites. It's an old idea, but doesn't really have any, other than what I just mentioned, any modern substantiation.
Okay.
So why would it work then in cancer is the question. It's not going to be because it's killing the bugs that are causing the cancer, but there are other purported mechanisms. I want to show some. So I call this an evidence-based approach, meaning that I'm not going to be talking about anecdotal data. This is a whole nother topic, but it's worth mentioning that my approach is, as would be 99% of scientists, would be to look at the evidence, meaning the peer-reviewed data on it, and not just Mrs. Jones said that she had liver cancer or she had brain cancer and she took ivermectin and she was cured, all of which is quite interesting from a lay point of view, but it doesn't pass muster with the scientific community. It's just of interest, but it isn't really just definitive.
And I just want to make a note for our podcast listeners who aren't able to see this. You can either go to YouTube to see it visually, or we will post the actual slideshow that Dr. Moss is giving here on themossreport.com on our article about ivermectin.
So we start with recapping what I just said, the history of ivermectin, that quite surprisingly for a quote-unquote alternative treatment, this is anything but. It's the inventors or discoverers of it, who were William C. Campbell and Satoshi Omura, actually won the 2015 Nobel Prize for this. And as the citation read, that they discovered a new drug, ivermectin, which radically lowered the incidence of river blindness and other diseases, and is showing efficacy against an expanding number of other parasitic diseases. It was discovered in 1975. Its first uses were, as I said, in veterinary medicine, and it also prevents and treats heartworm. It was approved for human use in 1987, so that took 13 years to get into the human treatment situation, and it's used to treat infestations of head lice, scabies, river blindness, and a number of other serious but lesser-known diseases.
Now, I have a question about that.
Go ahead.
So those are those topical treatments? I mean, I think you said it was like a cream you could buy for lice and so forth. Did they actually give it systemically through
absolutely
pills and things?
It's given as a tablet, and I would say the minority use would be for things like head lice.
Okay.
Where it's an over-the-counter drug. You don't need a prescription for that type of external application. But in 49 out of the 50 states, you need a prescription. Yeah, I know what the next question's going to be.
In which state don't you need it?
Tennessee.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So people have been known to drive or fly to Tennessee. You can go into a pharmacy, and if the pharmacist agrees and kind of advises you, you can get it there without a prescription. But I'm not recommending it. I'm just making a point of fact about it.
Understood.
Yeah. So I'm not going to go into any great detail about this controversy, which, as I said, is about 95 to 99% of the data about ivermectin's off-label or repurposed use is about COVID-19. Okay. I have no personal information about this. I didn't take it at the time that I had COVID. It didn't seem like there was enough evidence to support it, but others disagree. At the moment, there's no definitive proof that it was effective. I've looked at some of the studies on ivermectin and COVID-19, and just my superficial look at them shows only a very, very minor positive effect, probably not statistically significant, of taking the drug.
Well, I think that's a relevant point. For you're a real stickler for the data and the scientific method. And in this case, there seems to be a preponderance of anecdotal information of people saying different things about it. But I know you very well, and you never sort of form your opinions based purely on what people say about it. So
it does have an emotional effect, though. When I'll tell you a crazy thing. I mean, it's not something I'm bragging about, but I have some friends that I meet with regularly. And one of them came back from a trip to stay with their relatives. And the relative had told them a story about their cat who had cancer, and they gave it ivermectin. And they claimed that the cat then, was completely cured of the cancer. So I've heard these anecdotes myself. And I mean, as a person with cancer myself, it registers emotionally. The anecdotes, it's a funny thing because no matter how scientific you try to be, there's nothing like a human story that somebody might tell you, whether you know them well or not. But
Well,
I'd say,
good clinical trials are also human stories, but
true,
they're
good point.
they're not as often widely spread as some of these stories that we hear. But in any case, I'll let you continue with
The
where the
clinical
science is.
trial
Yeah.
attempts to eliminate personal bias from the presentation and not to rely upon if there are other factors that could be bringing about a particular result. They try to go into that in depth. That's the honest, the good, ideal clinical trials. We know that, of course, few things in life are ideal, and clinical trials also in practice, have their problems. But by and large, the goal of the clinical trial is to eliminate as much as possible the subjective element, whereas the goal of a story is to have usually to have an emotional impact on the listener. And it does. It has an emotional impact. And I'm not unaware of these very compelling seeming stories that people tell. I just have to say, though, that both in my work as an advisor to the National Institutes of Health and also in my career, I've always had the greatest difficulty in tracking down and verifying anecdotes which seemed incredibly promising when I heard them. And then when I went into the actual process of contacting the people who were supposedly the recipients or the beneficiaries of different kinds of treatment, I was usually disappointed. So that influences my own unwillingness to get too deep into the anecdotal stories.
Well, I won't prompt you for your response to the data around this because I'm sure you're about to get into it. So,
well, I wish I could get into it. So basically, there is very little to no data on the effect of ivermectin in cancer.
okay.
Here's the rundown. The first thing I do in terms of my own methodology is I go to PubMed, which is tens of millions of journal articles that are published studies that are cataloged by the National Library of Medicine, which is a branch of the National Institutes of Health. Sometimes people call these NIH studies. It's such a misnomer because just because something's in PubMed doesn't mean that it was sponsored by, paid for, endorsed by the U.S. National Institutes of Health. But a lot of lay people mistakenly believe that because something's in PubMed that therefore, the NIH and the government are endorsing it, and that's not the case. These are just simply what's out there, what has actually been published in scientific journals and some other journals that are not peer-reviewed as well. And I found if you do a search for ivermectin and cancer, there were 371 articles that somehow, somewhere in their keywords, mentioned those two terms. In 2024, there were 41 such studies. Another way of looking at this, very important, I just will filter it by full text, meaning I can look at the whole study, all the details of it, and without having to pay some exorbitant fee for looking at it. And there are 200 of those available. When you filter that by the clinical trial papers, there's a little box you can check for clinical trials. You just get 9. And if you filter that further by randomized control trials, which is the so-called gold standard of clinical trials, you just get 4.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, four might not be a bad number if they're
right?
good trials and we have some information from them.
Right. Another way of looking at this is to look at the review articles, which is when people are not presenting necessarily their own individual results, but they're reviewing the whole field as of the time that they're submitting their paper. There are 58 of those. A much more rigorous way of looking for a good review article, which sometimes is really what you are the main thing you're looking for, would be systematic reviews. That's where people try to assess all the articles and all the reviews that were done up until the time of their own submission, and that's an extremely valuable category. And
Is that the same as a meta-analysis?
It could be combined with a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis would be to take all of the published clinical trial data and aggregate that into as if it was one study and assign a value to each of the studies and then come up with a conclusion. When you have clinical trials that contradict one another, a meta-analysis is one way out of the dilemma of getting conflicting or contradictory results. So it's not exactly the same, but it isn't uncommon for people to simultaneously do both a systematic review and a meta-analysis. So you're close, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When I went into this, though, I found that looking at the systematic reviews, most of them, if not all of them, were actually about COVID-19. Cancer just entered in, like maybe there were some cancer patients in the group that had COVID-19, but it wasn't really about. There are not 11 systematic reviews, let's put it that way, of cancer and ivermectin.
Mm-hmm.
This Tang study from China was the most positive study that I found in terms of ivermectin and cancer. And they wrote, recently, ivermectin has been reported to inhibit the proliferation of several tumor cells by regulating multiple signaling pathways. This suggests that ivermectin may be an anti-cancer drug with great potential. And we'll give the link to that study.
Okay. What can you tell us about the study in terms of the number of people involved, and is it coming from a reputable organization, and the doctors and what have you?
The organization is totally reputable. It's a large Chinese university. I did look into it, and I, checked their credentials, and the journal has been around for about 30 years, Pharmacological Research. So I don't think there's anything wrong with this study, but you kind of inadvertently hit on the extreme weakness of the study and the data, which is it isn't about people. This is cell line research. These are cancer cells derived ultimately from human cancers, but they're not studies of human beings. So we're still in the laboratory here. In other words, this hasn't moved into the clinic. There is one study at the City of Hope, I think it is, in Los Angeles, that is studying ivermectin and another immune-related drug, an immune checkpoint inhibitor in cancer, but that is no longer accepting patients. Apparently, they've filled their quota of the number of patients. It's a phase 2 trial, so there's some glimmer of hope that we'll have some human clinical data. But even if the results with that study, that Los Angeles study, are positive, they won't be able to say whether it was there was the ivermectin or it was this other new candidate drug for immune checkpoint, immune modulation, altering the immune system that had the effect. So if the results are positive, one or both of those of these drugs in the trial possibly will go into further studies. But they're not even trying ivermectin anywhere in the world as a standalone cancer treatment.
That's surprising.
I was very surprised, but not surprised because I wrote a whole book called Cancer Incorporated to try to explain to the public and to the scientific community why it is that so many good, promising treatments and drugs fall by the wayside. And it isn't always that the drug failed, it's the system failed.
Well, but this is not something like we just discussed Sprouts, for example, that, some drug company can't make money off of. I mean, ivermectin is a patentable medicine. So if it can be profited from, why wouldn't they have actual studies going on if it shows promise for cancer? Is it just too inexpensive and it's not a big enough? I guess I don't understand why there wouldn't be bigger studies, especially with all of the, anecdotal information and the sort of, it's been a real buzz. As I said, we've gotten a lot of interest in it. I guess I'm confused.
Okay, so ivermectin was patented 50 years ago, but patents only last 20 years.
I see.
So the drug was out there. It went through its whole period of being patented, the legal monopoly. As I said, it was co-discovered by somebody at Merck, one of the biggest drug companies in the world. Now, they could apply for another use patent on it. Somebody could, assuming that hasn't been done already. But the real money in pharmaceuticals comes about from owning a patent. And in the first, let's say, 8 or 10 years of your marketing, you're going to make a fortune. So immune checkpoint drugs, the other kind of drug that is being used in that one little clinical trial in California, that drug is owned by a drug company that wants to get it approved. And then it might take some years to get it approved, but when they do, they're going to market the heck out of it if they can get FDA approval. And the price of these drugs is astronomical.
Right.
I mean, it's I don't want to give an exact figure, but it's in the realm of like $150,000 per patient. But that's all dependent upon not having competition from low-priced drugs. Ivermectin, of course, the dose hasn't been established for human beings, but from what I can see, at the present time, it's going to cost in the realm of about, let's say, under $10 per person.
Oh, I see.
Per day, let's say, if they took it every day. So you'd have a cost of a couple of $1,000s per year, but this is nothing in the modern day world of drug development. There are drugs out there on the market for $400,000 or $475,000. There's a special kinds of they have to be made especially for that person, but it is not uncommon for cancer drugs to be well up into 6 figures.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the money is. That's why Keytruda, pembrolizumab, has been the top selling cancer drug ever in history over the past couple of years. Why? Because they have a patent on it. If they didn't have a patent, then the price would plummet because of competition.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think anybody looking at ivermectin and saying, well, there was a patent on it. It's like saying maybe there was a patent on aspirin once. That didn't had special history to that, but many drugs were patented, and now they practically give them away at the pharmacy.
So in a way, ivermectin has joined the ranks of other natural remedies in that it's difficult for them to be studied because they don't produce enough profit. And as we've discussed many times before, it takes hundreds of millions of dollars or something to get a drug approved by the FDA.
Right. Exactly.
And who's going to spend $100 million to get something approved if you can't recover that through profits on the drug?
These are the ABCs of drug development. Of course, the public doesn't know that because the public's not, personally involved.
Unless they've read your work.
Right. but and other people's work too. This is so basic to how drugs and why drugs are developed. The public only sees the outward facing aspect of drug development, which is we're working hard every day to find cures for cancer and for your disease and so forth, which is not untrue because thousands of researchers are working very hard and doctors are well intentioned as a rule. But the system is set up to facilitate the development and exploitation of very high priced drugs for a period of time so that not only can the companies recover their money, but they can multiply the profits. And this is what businesses are for, right?
Right.
They have to make a return if they're owned by publicly owned by stockholders. So it shouldn't be surprising. But the net effect of this is that complementary treatments, that's to say things that are more likely to be in the realm of supplements or lifestyle modifications, have a very hard time.
Inexpensive off-label usage drugs like this one.
Right. There was a study done on IVM, which is shorthand for ivermectin, on cancer stem cells.
That's so.
A topic of great interest to me, and one of the focuses of my most recent book, The Moss Method. And that is that in the breast cancer cell line, they showed that it targeted cancer stem cell rich cell populations compared with other cell populations.
Okay. Based on a good study?
Yes. A good laboratory study. Yeah.
Laboratory study. So and that's where we get a lot of our data from about cancer stem cells.
Right.
So.
Very important.
Yeah. And okay, so.
No?
All right, go ahead.
So, and also, I mean, they break that down. I'm not going to go into any detail on this, but NANOG, you see these terms, NANOG, OCT4, and SOX2. These are typical markers of cancer stem cells. So they know what they're talking about. And this is highly positive because there are no drugs that preferentially kill cancer stem cells. I'm not even aware of drugs in the pipeline that do that. It's been one of the great frustrations for biologists has been that the cancer stem cells were discovered about 20 years ago, and here we are. There's still no drugs that come out of that discovery. So I think the whole world and the scientific community is kind of losing patience with this idea of the cancer stem cells, which is one of the great breakthrough ideas of the entire 50-year war on cancer, that it hasn't yielded an inhibitor of cancer stem cells in cancer therapy. Here we have a drug. It's an approved drug. It's being explored in an off-label use for cancer and turns out to kill cancer stem cells by very well-known, well-defined pathways. And there are others as well, by the way. I'm not going into the detail in that review article, but there are some other equally important things, like, for instance, there's a positive effect on apoptosis, which is the destruction of unwanted cells, and also there's effects on the immune system. So there are various good reasons to believe that this could be an important drug. I've wrestled with this, Ben, because of how controversial this is. I believe that we should be publicly advocating for a clinical trial of ivermectin in cancer.
Well,
I think it has a chance of breaking through, and something has to break through. And I don't think that breakthrough is going to be green tea or resveratrol or olive oil. I think it's going to be a drug that's familiar to all doctors, where there's public interest, probably some government or regulatory interest as well, and there is already one clinical trial, but it's very small, and as I say, the results will not be satisfying or definitive.
Right, that's the one where you say they're combining it with another checkpoint inhibitor.
Correct.
So
I doubt very
won't
much whether the
won't be
results
conclusive.
it won't be conclusive, because a negative result, you could say, well, the one drug wiped out the other one, the effects of the other one. A positive result, the company that's marketing the new immune checkpoint inhibitor, of course, they're going to claim that it was their drug that had the major effect. And if history is any guide, it's going to be that drug, that patented drug, that's going to move forward, and the other non-patented one will fall by the wayside. So I don't want to be negative about it, but the clinical trial in cancer has to be done in conjunction with people in the U.S. and abroad who are familiar with the whole issue of cancer stem cells, as people at University of Toronto, University of Michigan, Stanford. These are some of the centers where cancer stem cells have been most developed, and those people should be definitely in charge of or involved in the clinical trial. And it should be given a fair trial with an emphasis on studying the effects on cancer stem cells as the clinical results unfurl. So I would say this would be something of great importance, and there's no reason not to do it. The big negative will be a kind of sigh from the scientific community. Well, we've been down this road before, and we had our hopes raised with ivermectin and COVID, and it didn't pan out. But that's, drugs are repurposed all the time. If it didn't work in one situation, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to work in an entirely different situation, which cancer is.
Yeah. And I think that we're talking about cancer stem cells, and you mentioned the book, The Moss Method. We do go into some great detail on, even though you've said there are no drugs available, there are a number of ways that cancer stem cells can be fought in the body using nutritional means through diet and supplementation. And we do go into a great deal of detail on that in the book. And it seems as though we are on a campaign of awareness around cancer stem cells sort of more broadly. And so it would be great if the dovetailing of a study around ivermectin would also help raise awareness and help to promote further studies into how to fight cancer stem cells, which have such an important relationship to the development, the spread, and recurrence of cancer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it doesn't mean that, it would be distracting attention from the fact that there are dietary factors like we've talked about before, and as I go into great depth in my book, The Moss Method, that also kill and block cancer stem cells. This is all still as true as it was yesterday, but it would greatly enhance the public discussion of cancer stem cells, and if it was positive, I think it would have a spillover effect. Plus, it would get the government agencies, I'm thinking in the United States, that are under the umbrella of Health and Human Resources, to look more closely at non-patented repurposed drugs and supplements that also kill cancer stem cells. So it would reorient and give a focus to the war on cancer, which at this point is more focused on genetic aspects of cancer, I would say, than on environmental controls.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can hope.
What more can we do?
How do we respond to people who may be already using it or who are giving it to their patients? And the second part of that question really is toxicity.
So the first question is, are there side effects?
Yeah.
With ivermectin? There are. When you look at drugs.com, the professional side, which is a good database of information about almost all the drugs that have been approved, there's a wide variety of possible side effects, some of which are common and some are uncommon, which are more serious, but things like dizziness, fatigue, other things of that nature are
Okay.
common. So
Okay.
that's important. The and then there could be much more serious ones. So I would be completely against a situation which some people have raised the idea of um, it should be over the counter in every state in the union and in every country and so forth. I think this would be a very bad idea. I think it's too potentially toxic to just release it as an over the counter medication. On
Hmm.
the other hand, I think that doctors who want to use it in their practice should be encouraged to do so,
Hmm.
in the sense that I think that they should be required to keep good records of what's happening to the patients, assuming there's complete freedom of choice and not misinformation being spread about this.
Hmm.
So if somebody is, I mean, you could be a cure monger, around a perfectly legitimate drug if you overstate the effectiveness of the drug or the treatment,
Hmm.
right? It isn't just I mean, quackery is not something restricted to just unlicensed people. I mean, there have been cases where people misstate, many cases where doctors will misstate the effectiveness of a drug, and then there are oftentimes much more effective treatments out there that the public may be unaware of, and there might be people who would be discouraged from trying or using those other treatments. So in my mind, there's a limit to freedom of choice. I believe in freedom of choice, but I think the government has to set limits to that. But I think the big mistake that's been made over the years is to stigmatize doctors who want to use non-conventional treatments in their practice, assuming that there is informed consent and you're dealing with sane and sentient adults. I don't see any reason, especially in situations where you've reached the point in your cancer journey where the doctors are telling you basically that there's nothing further they can do for you. And since we have hundreds of thousands of people dying of cancer, I'm sure that this affects, innumerable people. So
Hmm.
that's a difficult situation. And if a doctor has had some experiences or beliefs that there could be value from something like ivermectin, then I would say as long as they keep good records and file that whatever mechanism with the NIH and with the FDA, I think they should be allowed and encouraged to do it, and certainly not stigmatized or punished for doing
Hmm.
so.
Hmm.
And it possibly has some beneficial effects, but because historically there have been quite a few side effects associated with the treatment, but we're not sure whether those side effects are because of the too rapid kill off of the organisms causing the parasitical diseases. So it's hard
Uh,
to differentiate the effectiveness of the treatment from the side effects of the treatment. With
hmm.
cancer, that can happen too. If you kill cancer cells too fast, too rapidly, you can get a very negative effect on the body because the organs of detoxification can't keep up with
Hmm.
the killing of the cancer. And people have actually rarely, and it doesn't happen much anymore, but there have been instances where people have gotten seriously sick and even died from the quick kill off of cancer cells, too rapid kill off of cancer
Hmm.
cells.
Just because the necrotic tissue in the body sort of
Right.
decaying,
Yeah, and
causing
the
sepsis or
liver
whatever.
and the kidneys can't keep up with it.
Mm.
So
Wow.
you've got to be careful, and even with known effective cancer drugs.
Would it be
I don't
okay?
think
Go on.
that's going to happen with ivermectin, but
Mhm.
one should be aware of that.
And I think it's also relevant for us to offer a cautionary statement here about people self-administering drugs, even if it were available over the counter. I'm pretty
I'm
certain you would recommend that they not go out and try to be taking this for themselves in order to try to beat cancer, especially to the exclusion of, other treatments, for example.
the other treatments. That's one big caveat. The other one is, how do you know what the correct dose is of the drug? Or what are you going to do if you run into serious side effects? Where are you
Yeah.
going to go? I mean, you went to a pharmacy in Tennessee to get it. The pharmacist isn't going to be able to help you once
Yeah.
you get in trouble. And there are a few doctors in the U.S., and I see them on the internet, YouTube, and so forth, who are endorsing the use of ivermectin publicly, and people are coming to them both for consultation and for treatment. But I don't know who those doctors are, what their training is, what their motive is for doing it. So I would say, cautiously, a cautious yes under certain circumstances, not as self-help, but under the guidance of a competent and ethical medical doctor.
Yeah. I just think about how many people are out there struggling financially who just want to be able to do things for themselves. And I think that's another reason why the topics that we discuss in the Moss method are very relevant, because you can almost say that they provide the same effect that this study that you've shown about the cancer stem cells, and fighting cancer stem cells in the body. Those effects can be gotten through nutrition.
I believe it. I wrote a book on it.
Yes, you did.
And I live my life that way. So,
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I'm not averse to taking conventional medicine when it's necessary.
Right.
So part of the part of the effort of staying alive is to be able to tell the difference and tell when you need professional help and when you're still in the realm of self-help. I don't see a contradiction between those two things, but I'm going to continue on with my own regimen, which is outlined in the book, in my book. So I still believe in that wholeheartedly. And if you look at it, if you didn't know, if you just said one was substance A and green tea was substance B and resveratrol was substance C, let's say, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Ivermectin might come out a little bit ahead, though, because in addition to having the anti-cancer stem cell effect, it also has positive effects on the immune system, which might make it even an even better substance. But again, my green tea that I had this morning, as long as I drink it in moderation, isn't going to hurt me. I mean, it's extremely rare for people to get serious side effects, unless you get into the realm of taking high-dose EGCG pills, which I'm not advocating. But taking through foods like sprouts, and we talked about, it's a relatively innocuous thing.
Right.
And it's also, in the laboratory, surprisingly effective.
I'm very glad that we were able to have this conversation. Thank you for digging into it and finding it out, what you could find in terms of where the science lives at the current state of science on ivermectin. And I think it is encouraging.
Good. I wasn't sure, when you asked me to take on this topic, I was a little bit nervous about it. Because of the controversy around it. And so I kind of surprised myself in a good way that in balance, I think this is a very positive thing, but should be done under, with guide rails, and that not to, if everybody rushed out suddenly and started to buy this over the counter, you'd see a lot of side effects, and then there would be a backlash against it. So it should be done in a controlled and very sane way, but compassionately.
Good. And if people want to be proactive, what should they do? Write to the Department of Health and Human Services and encourage them to get a clinical trial going on ivermectin on cancer?
I definitely think so, and they might find some sympathetic response there. Yeah.
That would be good. Okay. Well, thanks again, Dad. I appreciate everything you do.
Thank you, Ben.
All right. And for now, for the Moss Report, I'm Ben Moss. How are you healing today?